Section 11 of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Corrie Samuel. Chapter 4, Part 3. And as she drove, we may seize the opportunity, since the landscape was of a simple English kind which needs no description, to draw the reader's attention more particularly than we could at the moment to one or two remarks which have slipped in here and there in the course of the narrative. For example, it may have been observed that Orlando hid her manuscripts when interrupted. Next, that she looked long and intently in the glass, and now, as she drove to London, one might notice her starting and suppressing a cry when the horses galloped faster than she liked. Her modesty as to her writing, her vanity as to her person, her fears for her safety, all seems to hint that what was said a short time ago about there being no change in Orlando the man and Orlando the woman was ceasing to be altogether true. She was becoming a little more modest, as women are, of her brains, and a little more vain, as women are, of her person. Certain susceptibilities were asserting themselves, and others were diminishing. The change of clothes had, some philosophers will say, much to do with it. Vain trifles as they seem, clothes have, they say, more important offices than merely to keep us warm. They change our view of the world, and the world's view of us. For example, when Captain Bartolus saw Orlando's skirt, he had an awning stretched for her immediately, pressed her to take another slice of beef, and invited her to go ashore with him in the long-boat. These compliments would certainly not have been paid her had her skirts, instead of flowing, been cut tight to her legs in the fashion of breeches. And when we are paid compliments, it behoves us to make some return. Orlando curtsied, she complied, she flattered the good man's humours as she would not have done had his neat breeches been a woman's skirts, and his braided coat a woman's satin bodice. Thus there is much to support the view that it is clothes that wear us, and not we them. We may make them take the mould of arm or breast, but they mould our hearts, our brains, our tongues to their liking. So, having now worn skirts for a considerable time, a certain change was visible in Orlando, which is to be found if the reader will look at the picture above, even in her face. If we compare the picture of Orlando as a man with that of Orlando as a woman, we shall see that, though both are undoubtedly one and the same person, there are certain changes. The man has his hand free to seize his sword, the woman must use hers to keep the satins from slipping from her shoulders. The man looks the world full in the face, as if it were made for his uses and fashioned to his liking. The woman takes a sidelong glance at it, full of subtlety, even of suspicion. Had they both worn the same clothes, it is possible that their outlook might have been the same. That is the view of some philosophers, and wise ones, but on the whole we incline to another. The difference between the sexes is, happily, one of great profundity. Clothes are but a symbol of something hid deep beneath. It was a change in Orlando herself that dictated her choice of a woman's dress and of a woman's sex. And perhaps in this she was only expressing rather more openly than usual, openness indeed was the soul of her nature, something that happens to most people without being thus plainly expressed. For here again we come to a dilemma. Different though the sexes are, they intermix. In every human being a vacillation from one sex to the other takes place, and often it is only the clothes that keep the male or female likeness, while underneath the sex is the very opposite of what it is above. Of the complications and confusions which thus result, every one has had experience, but here we leave the general question, and note only the odd effect it had in the particular case of Orlando herself. For it was this mixture in her of man and woman, one being uppermost and then the other, that often gave her conduct an unexpected turn. The curious of her own sex would argue, for example, if Orlando was a woman, how did she never take more than 10 minutes to dress? And were not her clothes chosen rather at random, and sometimes worn rather shabby? And then they would say, "Still, she has none of the formality of a man, or a man's love of power. She is excessively tender-hearted. She could not endure to see a donkey beaten or a kitten drowned." Yet again, they noted, she detested household matters, was up at dawn and out among the fields in summer before the sun had risen. No farmer knew more about the crops than she did. She could drink with the best and liked games of hazard. She rode well and drove 6 horses at a gallop over London Bridge. Yet again, though bold and active as a man, it was remarked that the sight of another in danger brought on the most womanly palpitations. She would burst into tears on slight provocation. She was unversed in geography, found mathematics intolerable, and held some caprices which are more common among women than men, as, for instance, that to travel south is to travel downhill. Whether, then, Orlando was most man or woman, it is difficult to say, and cannot now be decided, for her coach was now rattling on the cobbles. She had reached her home in the city. The steps were being let down, the iron gates were being opened. She was entering her father's house at Blackfriars, which, though fashion was fast deserting that end of the town, was still a pleasant, roomy mansion, with gardens running down to the river, and a pleasant grove of nut-trees to walk in. Here she took up her lodging, and began instantly to look about her for what she had come in search of, that is to say, life and a lover. About the first there might be some doubt. The second she found without the least difficulty 2 days after her arrival. It was a Tuesday that she came to town. On Thursday she went for a walk in the Mall, which was then the habit of persons of quality. She had not made more than a turn or 2 of the avenue before she was observed by a little knot of vulgar people who go there to spy upon their betters. As she came past them, a common woman, carrying a child at her breast, stepped forward, peered familiarly into Orlando's face, and cried out, "Look upon us, if it ain't the Lady Orlando!" Her companions came crowding round, and Orlando found herself in a moment the centre of a mob of staring citizens and tradesmen's wives, all eager to gaze upon the heroine of the celebrated lawsuit. Such was the interest that the case excited in the minds of the common people. She might, indeed, have found herself gravely discommoded by the pressure of the crowd. She had forgotten that ladies are not supposed to walk in public places alone, had not a tall gentleman at once stepped forward and offered her the protection of his arm. It was the Archduke. She was overcome with distress, and yet with some amusement at the sight. Not only had this magnanimous nobleman forgiven her, but, in order to show that he took her levity with the toad in good part, he had procured a jewel made in the shape of that reptile, which he pressed upon her with a repetition of his suit, as he handed her to her coach. What with the crowd, what with the Duke, what with the jewel, she drove home in the vilest temper imaginable. Was it impossible, then, to go for a walk without being half suffocated, presented with a toad set in emeralds, and asked in marriage by an archduke? She took a kinder view of the case next day, when she found on her breakfast table 6 billets from some of the greatest ladies in the land, Lady Suffolk, Lady Salisbury, Lady Chesterfield, Lady Tavistock, and others who reminded her, in the politest manner, of old alliances between their families and her own, and desired the honour of her acquaintance. Next day, which was a Saturday, many of these great ladies waited on her in person. On Tuesday, about noon, their footmen brought cards of invitation to various routs, dinners, and assemblies in the near future, so that Orlando was launched without delay, and with some splash and foam at that, upon the waters of London society. To give a truthful account of London society at that, or indeed at any other time, is beyond the powers of the biographer or the historian. Only those who have little need of the truth, and no respect for it, the poets and the novelists, can be trusted to do it, for this is one of the cases where the truth does not exist. Nothing exists. The whole thing is a miasma, a mirage. To make our meaning plain, Orlando could come home from one of these routs at 3 or 4 in the morning, with cheeks like a Christmas tree and eyes like stars. She would untie a lace, pace the room a score of times, untie another lace, stop and pace the room again. Often the sun would be blazing over Southwark chimneys before she could persuade herself to get into bed, and there she would lie, pitching and tossing, laughing and sighing, for an hour or longer before she slept at last. And what was all this stir about? Society. And what had society said or done to throw a reasonable lady into such an excitement? In plain language, nothing. Rack her memory as she would, next day Orlando could never remember a single word to magnify into the name something. Lord O. had been gallant, Lord A. polite, the Marquis of C. charming, Mr. M. amusing. But when she tried to recollect in what their gallantry, politeness, charm, or wit had consisted, she was bound to suppose her memory at fault, for she could not name a thing. It was the same always. Nothing remained over the next day, yet the excitement of the moment was intense. Thus we are forced to conclude that society is one of those brews such as skilled housekeepers serve hot about Christmas time, whose flavour depends upon the proper mixing and stirring of a dozen different ingredients. Take one out, and it is in itself insipid. Take away Lord O, Lord A, Lord C, or Mr. M, and separately each is nothing. Stir them all together, and they combine to give off the most intoxicating of flavours, the most seductive of scents. Yet this intoxication, this seductiveness, entirely evade our analysis. At one and the same time, therefore, society is everything, and society is nothing. Society is the most powerful concoction in the world, and society has no existence whatsoever. Such monsters the poets and the novelists alone can deal with. With such something-nothings their works are stuffed out to prodigious size, and to them, with the best will in the world, we are content to leave it. Following the example of our predecessors, therefore, we will only say that society in the reign of Queen Anne was of unparalleled brilliance. To have the entry there was the aim of every well-bred person. The graces were supreme. Fathers instructed their sons, mothers their daughters. No education was complete for either sex which did not include the science of deportment, the art of bowing and curtsying, the management of the sword and the fan, the care of the teeth, the conduct of the leg, the flexibility of the knee, the proper methods of entering and leaving the room, with 1,000 et ceteras, such as will immediately suggest themselves to anybody who has himself been in society. Since Orlando had won the praise of Queen Elizabeth for the way she handed a bowl of rose-water as a boy, it must be supposed that she was sufficiently expert to pass muster. Yet it is true that there was an absent-mindedness about her which sometimes made her clumsy. She was apt to think of poetry when she should have been thinking of taffeta. Her walk was a little too much of a stride for a woman, perhaps, and her gestures, being abrupt, might endanger a cup of tea on occasion. Whether this slight disability was enough to counterbalance the splendour of her bearing, or whether she inherited a drop too much of that black humour which ran in the veins of all her race, certain it is that she had not been in the world more than a score of times before she might have been heard to ask herself, had there been anybody but her spaniel Pippin to hear her, "What the devil is the matter with me?" The occasion was Tuesday, the 16th of June, 1712. She had just returned from a great ball at Arlington House. The dawn was in the sky, and she was pulling off her stockings. "I don't care if I never meet another soul as long as I live!" cried Orlando, bursting into tears. Lovers she had in plenty, but life, which is, after all, of some importance in its way, escaped her. "Is this," she asked, but there was none to answer. "Is this," she finished her sentence all the same, "what people call life?" The spaniel raised her forepaw in token of sympathy. The spaniel licked Orlando with her tongue. Orlando stroked the spaniel with her hand. Orlando kissed the spaniel with her lips. In short, there was the truest sympathy between them that can be between a dog and its mistress, and yet it cannot be denied that the dumbness of animals is a great impediment to the refinements of intercourse. They wag their tails, they bow the front part of the body and elevate the hind, they roll, they jump, they paw, they whine, they bark, they slobber, they have all sorts of ceremonies and artifices of their own, but the whole thing is of no avail, since speak they cannot. Such was her quarrel, she thought, setting the dog gently onto the floor, with the great people at Arlington House. They too wag their tails, bow, roll, jump, paw, and slobber, but talk they cannot. "All these months that I've been out in the world," said Orlando, pitching one stocking across the room, "I've heard nothing but what Pippin might have said. I'm cold, I'm happy, I'm hungry, I've caught a mouse, I've buried a bone, please kiss my nose." And it was not enough. How, in so short a time, she had passed from intoxication to disgust, we will only seek to explain by supposing that this mysterious composition which we call society is nothing absolutely good or bad in itself, but has a spirit in it, volatile but potent, which either makes you drunk when you think it, as Orlando thought it, delightful, or gives you a headache when you think it, as Orlando thought it, repulsive. That the faculty of speech has much to do with it either way, we take leave to doubt. Often a dumb hour is the most ravishing of all. Brilliant wit can be tedious beyond description. But to the poets we leave it, and so on with our story. Orlando threw the second stocking after the first, and went to bed dismally enough, determined that she would forswear society for ever. But again, as it turned out, she was too hasty in coming to her conclusions. For the very next morning she woke to find, among the usual cards of invitation upon her table, one from a certain great lady, the Countess of R. Having determined overnight that she would never go into society again, we can only explain Orlando's behaviour. She sent a messenger hot foot to our house to say that she would attend her ladyship with all the pleasure in the world, by the fact that she was still suffering from the effect of 3 honeyed words dropped into her ear on the deck of the Enamoured Lady by Captain Nicholas Benedict Bartolus, as they sailed down the Thames. Addison, Dryden, Pope, he had said, pointing to the cocoa tree, and Addison, Dryden, Pope had chimed in her head like an incantation ever since. Who can credit such folly? But so it was. All her experience with Nick Green had taught her nothing. Such names still exercised over her the most powerful fascination. Something, perhaps, we must believe in, and as Orlando, we have said, had no belief in the usual divinities, she bestowed her credulity upon great men, yet with a distinction. Admirals, soldiers, statesmen moved her not at all, but the very thought of a great writer stirred her to such a pitch of belief that she almost believed him to be invisible. Her instinct was a sound one. One can only believe entirely, perhaps, in what one cannot see. The little glimpse she had of these great men from the deck of the ship was of the nature of a vision. That the cup was china or the Gazette paper she doubted. When Lord O. said one day that he had dined with Dryden the night before, she flatly disbelieved him. Now the Lady R.'s reception-room had the reputation of being the antechamber to the presence-room of genius. It was the place where men and women met to swing censers and chant hymns to the bust of genius in a niche in the wall. Sometimes the god himself vouchsafed his presence for a moment. Intellect alone admitted the suppliant, and nothing, so the report ran, was said inside that was not witty. It was thus with great trepidation that Orlando entered the room. She found a company already assembled in a semicircle round the fire. Lady R., an oldish lady of dark complexion, with a black lace mantilla on her head, was seated in a great armchair in the centre. Thus, being somewhat deaf, she could control the conversation on both sides of her. On both sides of her sat men and women of the highest distinction. Every man, it was said, had been a prime minister, and every woman, it was whispered, had been the mistress of a king. Certain it is that all were brilliant and all were famous. Orlando took her seat with a deep reverence in silence. After 3 hours she curtsied profoundly and left. But what, the reader may ask with some exasperation, happened in between? In 3 hours such a company must have said the wittiest, the profoundest, the most interesting things in the world. So it would seem indeed. But the fact appears to be that they said nothing. It is a curious characteristic which they share with all the most brilliant societies that the world has seen. Old Madame du Deffand and her friends talked for 50 years without stopping, and of it all what remains? Perhaps 3 witty sayings. So that we are at liberty to suppose either that nothing was said, or that nothing witty was said, or that the fraction of 3 witty sayings lasted 18,250 nights, which does not leave a liberal allowance of wit for any one of them. The truth would seem to be, if we dare use such a word in such a connection, that all these groups of people lie under an enchantment. The hostess is our modern Sibyl. She is a witch who lays her guests under a spell. In this house they think themselves happy, in that witty, in a third profound. It is all an illusion, which is nothing against it, for illusions are the most valuable and necessary of all things, and she who can create one is among the world's greatest benefactors. But as it is notorious that illusions are shattered by conflict with reality, so no real happiness, no real wit, no real profundity are tolerated where the illusion prevails. This serves to explain why Madame du Deffand said no more than 3 witty things in the course of 50 years. Had she said more, her circle would have been destroyed. The witticism, as it left her lips, bowled over the current conversation as a cannon-ball lays low the violets and the daisies. When she made her famous mot de Saint-Denis, the very grass was singed. Disillusionment and desolation followed. Not a word was uttered. "Spare us another such, for heaven's sake, madame!" her friends cried with one accord. And she obeyed. For almost 17 years she said nothing memorable, and all went well. The beautiful counterpane of illusion lay unbroken on her circle as it lay unbroken on the circle of Lady R. The guests thought that they were happy, thought that they were witty, thought that they were profound, and, as they thought this, other people thought it still more strongly, and so it got about that nothing was more delightful than one of Lady R.'s assemblies. Everyone envied those who were admitted. Those who were admitted envied themselves because other people envied them, and so there seemed no end to it, except that which we have now to relate. For about the 3rd time Orlando went there, a certain incident occurred. She was still under the illusion that she was listening to the most brilliant epigrams in the world, though, as a matter of fact, old General C was only saying, at some length, how the gout had left his left leg and gone to his right, while Mr. L interrupted when any proper name was mentioned. "R? Oh, I know Billy R as well as I know myself. S, my dearest friend. T stayed with him a fortnight in Yorkshire." Which, such is the force of illusion, sounded like the wittiest repartee, the most searching comment upon human life, and kept the company in a roar. When the door opened, and a little gentleman entered, whose name Orlando did not catch. Soon a curiously disagreeable sensation came over her. To judge from their faces, the rest began to feel it as well. One gentleman said there was a draught. The Marchioness of C feared a cat must be under the sofa. It was as if their eyes were being slowly opened after a pleasant dream, and nothing met them but a cheap washstand and a dirty counterpane. It was as if the fumes of some delicious wine were slowly leaving them. Still the General talked, and still Mr. L remembered. But it became more and more apparent how red the General's neck was, how bald Mr. L's head was. As for what they said, Nothing more tedious and trivial could be imagined. Everybody fidgeted, and those who had fans yawned behind them. At last Lady R. rapped with hers upon the arm of her great chair. Both gentlemen stopped talking. Then the little gentleman said. He said next. He said finally. These sayings are too well known to require repetition, and besides they are all to be found in his published works. Here, it cannot be denied, was true wit, true wisdom, true profundity. The company was thrown into complete dismay. One such saying was bad enough, but 3, one after another, on the same evening! No society could survive it. "Mr. Pope," said old Lady R., in a voice trembling with sarcastic fury, "you are pleased to be witty." Mr. Pope flushed red. Nobody spoke a word. They sat in dead silence some 20 minutes. Then, one by one, they rose and slunk from the room. That they would ever come back after such an experience was doubtful. Link boys could be heard calling their coaches all down South Audley Street. Doors were slammed and carriages drove off. Orlando found herself near Mr. Pope on the staircase. His lean and misshapen frame was shaken by a variety of emotions. Darts of malice, rage, triumph, wit, and terror, he was shaking like a leaf, shot from his eyes. He looked like some squat reptile set with a burning topaz in its forehead. At the same time, the strangest tempest of emotion seized now upon the luckless Orlando. A disillusionment so complete as that inflicted not an hour ago leaves the mind rocking from side to side. Everything appears 10 times more bare and stark than before. It is a moment fraught with the highest danger for the human spirit. Women turn nuns and men priests in such moments. In such moments, rich men sign away their wealth, and happy men cut their throats with carving knives. Orlando would have done all willingly, but there was a rasher thing still for her to do, and this she did. She invited Mr. Pope to come home with her. For if it is rash to walk into a lion's den unarmed, rash to navigate the Atlantic in a rowing boat, rash to stand on one foot on the top of St. Paul's, it is still more rash to go home alone with a poet. A poet is Atlantic and lion in one. While one drowns us, the other gnaws us. If we survive the teeth, we succumb to the waves. A man who can destroy illusions is both beast and flood. Illusions are to the soul what atmosphere is to the earth. Roll up that tender air, and the plant dies, the colour fades. The earth we walk on is a parched cinder. It is marl we tread, and fiery cobbles scorch our feet. By the truth we are undone. Life is a dream. 'Tis waking that kills us. He who robs us of our dreams robs us of our life. And so on for 6 pages if you will, but the style is tedious and may well be dropped. On this showing, however, Orlando should have been a heap of cinders by the time the chariot drew up at her house in Blackfriars. That she was still flesh and blood, though certainly exhausted, is entirely due to a fact to which we drew attention earlier in the narrative. The less we see, the more we believe. Now, the streets that lie between Mayfair and Blackfriars were at that time very imperfectly lit. True, the lighting was a great improvement upon that of the Elizabethan age. Then the benighted traveller had to trust to the stars, or the red flame of some night watchman, to save him from the gravel pits at Park Lane, or the oak woods where swine rootled in the Tottenham Court Road. But even so it wanted much of our modern efficiency. Lamp-posts lit with oil lamps occurred every 200 yards or so, but between lay a considerable stretch of pitch darkness. Thus, for 10 minutes, Orlando and Mr. Pope would be in blackness, and then for about half a minute again in the light. A very strange state of mind was thus bred in Orlando. As the light faded, she began to feel steal over her the most delicious balm. "This is indeed a very great honour for a young woman to be driving with Mr. Pope," she began to think, looking at the outline of his nose. "I am the most blessed of my sex. Half an inch from me. Indeed, I feel the knot of his knee ribbons pressing against my thigh is the greatest wit in Her Majesty's dominions. Future ages will think of us with curiosity, and envy me with fury." Here came the lamp-post again. "What a foolish wretch I am," she thought. "There is no such thing as fame or glory. Ages to come will never cast a thought on me or on Mr. Pope either. What's an age, indeed? What are we?" And their progress through Berkeley Square seemed the groping of two blind ants, momentarily thrown together without interest or concern in common, across a blackened desert. She shivered. But here again was darkness. Her illusion revived. "How noble his brow is," she thought, mistaking a hump on a cushion for Mr. Pope's forehead in the darkness. "What a weight of genius lives in it! What wit, wisdom, and truth! What a wealth of all those jewels, indeed, for which people are ready to barter their lives! Yours is the only light that burns for ever. But for you the human pilgrimage would be performed in utter darkness." Here the coach gave a great lurch as it fell into a rut in Park Lane. "Without genius we should be upset and undone. Most august, most lucid of beams." Thus she was apostrophising the hump on the cushion when they drove beneath one of the street lamps in Berkeley Square, and she realised her mistake. Mr. Pope had a forehead no bigger than another man's. "Wretched man," she thought, "how you have deceived me! I took that hump for your forehead. When one sees you plain, how ignoble, how despicable you are! Deformed and weakly, there is nothing to venerate in you, much to pity, most to despise." Again they were in darkness, and her anger became modified directly she could see nothing but the poet's knees. "But is it that I am a wretch?" she reflected, once they were in complete obscurity again. "For base as you may be, am I not still baser? It is you who nourish and protect me, you who scare the wild beast, frighten the savage, make me clothes of the silkworm's wool, and carpets of the sheep's. If I want to worship, have you not provided me with an image of yourself and set it in the sky? Are not evidences of your care everywhere? How humble, how grateful, how docile should I not be, therefore? Let it be all my joy to serve, honour, and obey you." Here they reached the big lamp-post at the corner of what is now Piccadilly Circus. The light blazed in her eyes, and she saw, besides some degraded creatures of her own sex, two wretched pygmies on a stark desert island. Both were naked, solitary, and defenceless. The one was powerless to help the other. Each had enough to do to look after itself. Looking Mr. Pope full in the face, "It is equally vain," she thought, "for you to think you can protect me, or for me to think I can worship you. The light of truth beats upon us without shadow, and the light of truth is damnably unbecoming to us both." All this time, of course, they went on talking agreeably, as people of birth and education use, about the Queen's temper and the Prime Minister's gout, while the coach went from light to darkness down the Haymarket, along the Strand, up Fleet Street, and reached, at length, her house in Blackfriars. For some time the dark spaces between the lamps had been becoming brighter, and the lamps themselves less bright. That is to say, the sun was rising, and it was in the equable but confused light of a summer's morning, in which everything is seen but nothing is seen distinctly, that they alighted, Mr. Pope handing Orlando from her carriage, and Orlando curtsying Mr. Pope to precede her into her mansion, with a most scrupulous attention to the rights of the Graces. From the foregoing passage, however, it must not be supposed that genius—but the disease is now stamped out in the British Isles, the late Lord Tennyson, it is said, being the last person to suffer from it—is constantly alight. For then we should see everything plain, and perhaps should be scorched to death in the process. Rather it resembles the lighthouse in its working, which sends one ray, and then no more for a time, save that genius is much more capricious in its manifestations, and may flash 6 or 7 beams in quick succession, as Mr. Pope did that night, and then lapse into darkness for a year or for ever. To steer by its beams is therefore impossible, and when the dark spell is upon them, men of genius are, it is said, much like other people. Section 12.